Welcome to Clash of Health. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to take on a topic that might be a little controversial. It's about privilege. And what is privileged? Who's privileged? Who gets to decide who's privileged? And is it a sociological phenomenon or is it a personal phenomena? So let's do it. Let's talk about privilege. So I think back to this dinner that I went to where there was a man at the dinner. He was from India, from the Brahmin caste, the highest caste. I think it's the highest caste in India. And he was very openly acknowledging his privilege. And he said he was talking about white male privilege. And I said to him, yes, I get where you're coming from. And I know a lot of these white males who are in their 20s who've died of heroin addiction. And I don't know if I would call them necessarily privileged. And he argued that, yes, they were privileged. And I said, how privileged are you if you're dead? And so it got to be kind of a heated conversation, honestly, with this gentleman. And I walked away really kind of taking in what he was saying and understanding for sure there's first world problems and some people have access to resources that other people don't have. And all things being equal, some people are much more privileged than other people. And historically, white males have been incredibly privileged comparatively than females and, people who aren't white. But I also was thinking about privilege from a more complex perspective than just access to resources, that privilege is also intrinsic. And so I'd love to explore the dimensions of health that I think make up the collage of health and look at each of them from a stance of what makes someone privileged and what makes someone less privileged. So when I looked up the 8 dimensions of health, it included the emotional, the mental, the physical, the spiritual, the intellectual, the environmental, and the financial, and the occupational. If I said occupational twice, forgive me. So with the emotional privilege and the mental privilege, I think we're looking at things like, is someone free of mental illness? Are they depressed versus are they not depressed? Do they have autism or do they have, not, I think many autistic people would say they're privileged. So I think that's just a perception. But I think that if you ask a depressed person, are you privileged in this moment? They would see the world from a very clouded, dark perspective where they would say, I don't feel very privileged right now at all. I can't even get out of bed. I think too, when we look at emotional health, we also are looking at temperament. And I think some people are privileged to have a I don't want to say better temperament, but really a better temperament, maybe a better outlook on life, someone who tends to be positive and peaceful and um, hopeful and eager to get up in the morning versus someone who tends to see the pessimistic side of life, who tends to be irritable. They might not even be depressed, but they just have more of an irritable, angry personality. And I would definitely say that the former is in a much better seat for privilege than the latter. When we look at mental, we're also looking at ability to concentrate, to pay attention, volition, the ability to get up and go and to do things, focus. And then this leads into intellectual privilege. Do people have intellectual disabilities? Do they have a higher IQ versus a lower IQ, where they are maybe able to think more abstractly and see the bigger picture just because of what their inborn intellectual capacity. Now, many of these things can be tempered, just like any of these dimensions can be worked, in certain ways to a certain extent, more or less. But we also have these limits, these intellectual, emotional, mental limits that that are innate. Then we can look at physical privilege. Someone who maybe is right-handed might be considered more privileged than a left-handed person. Maybe someone who has what's called, from an Ayurvedic perspective, a SAR, a gift with, skin that's shiny and eyesight that's good and adequate ability to hear and good bones, good muscles, and no deformities or birth defects, things like that, which would impede someone's ability to maybe be privileged comparatively to someone else. Do they have any kind of chronic illness that they're having to navigate through life, like diabetes, like juvenile diabetes, type 1 diabetes, where they have to wear a pump their whole life to monitor their insulin and their food intake? Occupational privilege. Do they have access? Of course, this is going to be from a financial perspective to a certain extent too. Do they have access to jobs? And that feeds into all the domains. If someone's has it more of an intellectual capacity, they might have a greater pick from their jobs. Maybe they did better on testing than someone else did. Occupational safety. Do they have occupational safety? There are factory farm plants throughout the country where there are undocumented people or very poor people who are working in these plants. They don't really have the ability to move maybe to another city, and there's not a lot of options for job situations, and they might be in an occupational situation that's pretty compromised. Occupation goes along with school. Do people have access to education? If we're looking at the world, we're looking at, education from maybe women not having access to education in certain countries, or occupations in certain parts of the world that there isn't safety protocols in place. Some would even say in the United States, this happens too, behind back doors. Environmental. Do people have access to clean water, to clean food, to shelter? Air pollution. Do people have clean air? And then you look at spiritual, which I think is the biggest of all of these privilege dimensions. Do people have a compass, a spiritual compass? Are they aligned with their inner integrity? Are they aligned with a higher power, something greater than themselves? Maybe it's nature. Maybe they have a connection with the outdoors or animals or nature, which helps them navigate the pitfalls in life. Do they have a practice, a spiritual practice, where it's really been taught to them to have a sadhana practice where it can really help to fortify them as they encounter life hits? And then lastly, financial. Do people have access to money? Do they have access to healthcare? That would go along more with the physical. There's, in the United States, there's kind of like a weird situation where you might have Medicaid, but some states don't have um, wraparound services. So there's poor people, but they're not able to access the Medicaid. So they don't have insurance. They're uninsured individuals. So do you have access through financial means to healthcare, to all of the other things that you'd like to explore, but you can't because of financial constraints? So it's a complicated topic, I think, with privilege. I think in part, I want to do this video to underscore not only it's a real thing, first world problems is a real thing. And even within the first world, there are people who are much more privileged than other people. But I also want to underscore the importance of intrinsic factors that impact on privilege, and that really, I feel like, is a personal thing, and it has to be defined by the person, that they feel these privileges based on their ability to navigate life, with the greatest ease, so to speak. When I was a girl, a young kid, my mom, she was quite wise, and she worked for all of her career with underserved populations. And she would talk about, like, some people haven't suffered enough. That was what she would say. Like, they don't know the difference between wants and needs because they really haven't lived, a full life in terms of not only personally experiencing suffering, but also, um, seeing that suffering that other people have experienced. So I think, to have endured hardship, be it from a financial perspective or maybe even a mental illness perspective or a disability, you know, intellectual disability, a physical disability, all of those things help people recognize, I think sometimes when they are privileged. And then you get the rare birds who outwardly maybe haven't suffered, they haven't seen how they've suffered, but they're these bastions of wisdom, and they probably have suffered. I think of, the Eckhart Tolle's of the world, and Wayne Dyer. Of course, Wayne Dyer was in foster care. He was super poor as a kid. But when they do come into affluence, they are grateful and they're able to help all of us, be it privileged or not, recognize how being grateful enhances our sense of well-being, which eventually enhances our privilege. So I think that might be a good place to stop. I'd love to hear your opinions. I know this is kind of a tricky topic, and I understand the way this topic came to be, but I also understand that all topics need to be looked at with discernment and curiosity and compassion, self-energy, in order to really not make situations worse, or people who, there's fingers pointed at them for being privileged when they don't feel privileged, makes them feel all the worse. And in no way does that help anybody. So thanks for listening. Have a good day. Like or subscribe if you're interested in more videos such as this and other collage style videos that are being put out.